Welcome to Crime Most French, a fortnightly podcast covering intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
This is episode 72, Who Killed Robert Boulin? On the 30th of October 1979, the body of Robert Boulin, Minister for Work of the then centre-right government, is found dead in a lake near Paris. Who killed the minister and why?
That's quite high profile.
It's one of the stories I remember from when I was a kid, but only very vaguely, because I was only 6 at the time, five. So, but I'm aware of his name and I'm vaguely aware that something happened to him, but no more than that. So he was the Minister for Work, as in work and pensions, of the Valéry Giscard d'Estaing government. So it was the centre-right government that reached power in 1974 with Pompidou.
So it's quite a young and dynamic leader.
Oh, he was the youngest.
Not Pompidou.
He was the youngest president at the time. And I think only Sarkozy was younger. No, Macron was younger. But he was around 40 when he was elected president. And I think Macron was 39 or something. So he was just marginally younger. He was very young.
And that terrifies me that Macron is that significantly younger than me. And I find it hard to kind of like try and be organised enough to get my shopping done once a week. How he runs a country, I don't know. But never mind.
Yeah. Well, some people are like that. So he was well considered at the time, and he was expected to become prime minister fairly soon as well.
All right. So he's being groomed for leadership.
It's a bit complicated. The president was centre-right. The party was called UDF. And he was right. So he was right of the government. It came from a party called RPR, which no longer exists. But people thought originally that he was made minister at some kind of appeasement from the centre-right to the right to get their support. But it happens that he was in fact very competent.
Right.
And VGE, the president, was what now people would call a technocrat. He was very technical. When he was going to have a meeting with people, he would work all night to learn everything there is to learn about the subject. And Robert Boulin was doing the same thing. So they got along really, really well. Right,
okay. I think Macron's a bit like that as well, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. So that's why they kind of hit it off without knowing that it would happen. And that's why VGE several times in speeches said he will be my next prime minister.
Yeah.
And it ties into the story because it pissed off the right endlessly.
Right.
Because they saw him from that point on as a traitor, essentially. But it will come back in the story. So at 8:40 a.m. on the 30th of October 1979, his body is found floating in about 60 centimeters of water in a small lake in the west of Paris.
And it's not the time of year to be kind of like going swimming in Paris. It's starting to get a bit cold.
Also, that lake didn't really have much water. 60 centimeters was pretty standard for the lake. It was a big pond, really.
Oh, right, okay.
It was about 200 meters from the road, and nearby his car was parked with a goodbye note on the dashboard.
Oh, they tried to make it look like suicide.
But very quickly, the press relays that it is a suicide. That's
Okay.
what they say straight away. They don't say, oh, he was found dead. They say straight away, he committed suicide. That's how they presented the thing at the 1 o'clock news in the afternoon, which was only a few hours later.
Yeah.
But that's what they were told by whoever was giving them the information.
I don't think they would do that now, would they?
No, I don't know. The press can't be really taken seriously at the moment. You can see how they treated Trump. When the press starts saying that it's a suicide, the body hasn't even been removed from the lake yet. So they're just repeating what they've been told.
Right.
What they're told is that the minister took some pills, sleeping pills, walked into the lake and drowned in 60 centimeters of water. That's the story they're given. That's the story they repeat. As proof, there are a few letters that he would have sent to people in the recent past, in which he said that he wanted to commit suicide. The press are kind of given something that is supposed to be proof.
And something quite plausible.
Something plausible.
Because you tend not to get people who are at the top of their business, at the top of their career, committing suicide. It's not really
It doesn't
that.
happen often in ministers, no.
No.
In fact, I can't remember the last one. Very quickly, there is a cleavage at the National Assembly. The centre-right are happy with the explanation. And the left thinks that something is fishy.
Mm.
An MP, Laurent Fabius, who will be Prime Minister in the 80s, asks the Justice Minister if the truth will be known in the affair, or if it's going to be buried. Raymond Barre, who then is the Prime Minister, replies that the government wants the truth to be known, and it will do all it can for it to happen.
Well, that should be going without being said, surely.
Yes, but the left felt like it had to be said because they didn't think the government would be truthful in it.
I see, okay.
So now they're trying to essentially corner the government in having to do something. They won't be able to just let it die and disappear and nothing knows, nobody knows what happened, because they now have said that they have to do everything they can to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all that was. Even the president, when he's interviewed by journalists, is asked direct questions about the case in the next few days, and he says that he will make sure that the truth is known as well. Obviously, there was no possible answer. He couldn't answer, no, I'm going to make sure it's buried.
Yes.
So that's all he could answer anyway. Some ministers at the time remember that they were in a cabinet meeting on that morning, and there was an empty chair, his chair. They didn't know anything, because at that point, the meeting started before his body was found.
Ah, yes, okay, so
and they were sitting around the table, and one of the important ministers wasn't there. And they had no clue why, but it just wasn't there. And at some point, a clerk interrupts the meeting and gives the president a note, a small sheet of paper. He reads it, and he announced, your colleague, Robert Boulin, is dead. He committed suicide last night. And then the meeting continued.
That's a bit cold.
Like nothing happened. The one minister that was interviewed not that long ago about it said, it was so weird. Like, a guy was missing. We were told he was dead. He committed suicide. And that was it. We just continued and did our normal work.
I mean, really, it just sounds like somebody came in and said, right, we're going to be out of chips in the canteen at lunchtime. Carry on.
Yeah.
That is cold.
That's very weird. And also the way he said, your colleague, I found very strange. It wasn't my minister, it was your colleague.
Your colleague, yes.
So
no,
anyway,
not even our colleague. Your colleague.
Your colleague, yes.
Yes.
That's very strange.
Very strange, yeah.
To make things weirder, ministers are asked not to go to the funerals. And
why?
Well, the reason why is that the party, his party, and the party in power didn't want to make a big thing out of it. They didn't want to blow it into a massive state affair.
Right.
So they decided...
Oh, they were trying to let the family grieve, were
yes,
they?
if no minister goes, then it's not important, and therefore the press is not going to make a big thing out of it, and everybody will forget quickly. That was their strategy. So only the Prime Minister and Interior Minister went to the funeral, and that's it.
Right.
No other minister went.
So presumably... I mean, at this time, I'm thinking most of these ministers would have all have gone to INA, and they probably all knew each other.
Yes.
I don't know if I've mentioned this before, and just to give a quick background, the French had a very elitist school, which was called the National...
École Nationale de l'Administration.
D'administration, yes. And you would have all of the high flyers, all the people that did really well would be recruited to go through this school, and then you can work for the government in what other shape or form. So these people would have all kind of like rubbed elbows with this guy. They wouldn't have just...
Yeah, they would have known him pretty well, yes.
So...
But no minister goes. Nobody from the party goes.
I think it's a bit cold that they didn't let anyone else go.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, to me, he would have
It's very unusual as well. If a minister dies, normally the whole government and everybody in his party and all that, everybody goes. And in his case, nobody did.
That just feels very strange.
Yes. Well, it is because people wanted to bury the story. Yeah. They didn't want it to be a big thing in the press with all the ministers and the president being there and... If nobody goes and nothing to say, therefore there's no story.
In the back of my head, I know that we're doing a podcast called Crime Most French, so I'm suspecting he didn't commit suicide. I hope that's not a spoiler for everybody.
Yes. So after the funeral, Jacques Chaban-Delmas, who was one of his friends and the mayor of Bordeaux for at least 50 years, he was also a prime minister between 1969 and 1972, so under Pompidou.
I was going to say that it must be
And
Pompidou.
he was an MP as well most of his life, went to talk to the family. And he told them, if you have dirt, give it to me now, and then release the dogs. If you don't have anything, I won't be able to help. I won't have any more weight than Robert. These people are dangerous.
Wow.
That's what he told the family at the funeral. So obviously he knew something. He knew something that led to Robert Boulin's death.
Right.
But he never talked about it more than that. The only other thing he did in the assembly was to shout murderers when one of the ministers was talking.
Wow.
So
This feels so surreal.
yeah, it is weird. It is weird. So obviously he knew something but didn't have the proof. So he was hoping the family would have something.
I mean, I feel like I'm in an Aaron Sorkin movie at the moment.
Oh, that's pretty much it, yeah. In the meantime, the body is removed from the lake, obviously, and they do an autopsy on it. But not everything goes as expected. For a start, the doctors who examine the body are forbidden to look at the skull. They are told that the family requested it, which is denied by the widow and his son.
Yeah. Why would you disallow somebody to do their job?
Well,
this is a specialised job.
It turns out when journalists started digging into it, that it was the cabinet manager of Robert Boulin, so he's essentially a cabinet manager, office manager, who said he was talking for the family and asked for the doctors not to look at the skull.
Except that
the family never asked for it. They denied it. So that's a bit strange.
Yes.
Another thing to prove drowning would be to examine the lungs.
Yes.
And confirm that the water in the lungs comes from the lake, diatoms and all that. And we know we watch forensic files.
Yeah.
Except that it's not done.
That's crazy.
And the lungs are taken out, put it into a jar, and the jar disappears.
Oh, this is crazy.
Another thing is, normally when the heart stops beating, the blood pools in the lower parts of the body.
Yes.
And you can see the marks on the skin.
There's they go red.
Pattern
yes.
on the skin.
Yes.
Robert Boulin was found face down in the lake.
So he should be red.
So
all
the
down
pooling should be on the
front
of the body. Pooling is on the back.
So he didn't drown.
Well, he died somehow, pooled, and then turned around.
Yes. He drowned in a lake on his back.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not possible. That's just not...
It would be possible, maybe, but turning, I don't see how he would turn.
He would need something very heavy to keep him underneath the water.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's just not physically possible.
No, and in 60 centimeters of water, it's hard to see how.
Exactly.
So that's another very strange thing. But again, somehow... nobody cares that much. Nobody mentions it. Nobody looks into it. Nobody's surprised. No prints are taken anywhere. No prints are taken on his things, on his car. No prints are collected.
Oh my God.
And none of that changes the suicide explanation either. So the police inquiry at that point is done, it's quick, and they conclude to a suicide. Case closed.
Yeah, that's just not bullshit. That's just bullshit. Sorry, but no. That he clearly didn't commit suicide.
Yes. So there are some people looking into it and they're asking, okay, if he committed suicide, why would he commit suicide? He had found himself at the center of an affair of fraudulent purchase of land on the Mediterranean coast fairly recently. It was published by a newspaper called Canard Enchaîné, which is a political newspaper.
Yes.
They reported that he bought land to build a holiday house, which he did, when it had already been sold to someone else. So essentially, he bought from under someone else, which is illegal.
He gazumped.
Is it what it's called?
Yes.
It's illegal here, but yes.
But you have to gazump before the sale goes through.
Oh yes, no, in that case it had already been sold to someone else and somehow he bought it instead of that person. So essentially, the sale was cancelled after having been happened. So that's what the newspaper say. So
Okay.
it's like you buy the house,
Yes.
you sign the sale contract,
Yes.
and you're told, nah, it's not happening after all
Yeah.
because that guy bought it instead. That's illegal.
I think if I'm remembering rightly, because I don't think you can't do it in Scotland, but I think you can do that. You used to be able to do that anyway in England, and it's called gazumping.
So that's what he's accused of having done, and apparently is following these revelations, which have never been really proved, that he would have sent the letters that were then shown to the press when he said he wanted to commit suicide and all that.
Is that going to be enough to make you commit suicide?
But also his family denies that it is possible that he would have thought of suicide just for that. He wasn't that kind of person. And his friend, like Chabon Delmas, also said, no, that's not the guy who commits suicide. That's a guy who fights back.
Yes.
So for the family and the people who know him, it's not believable.
No.
These letters are fake, according to them. But that's what's presented as an explanation for it. Also, the people who knew him know that because he would not let that happen, he would fight back. They explain that the only reason why that would have happened, why that information, if it was true or not, doesn't matter, but why that information would have been given to the press is to attack him personally. And that would have come from his party, the RPR. That's what his friends say. Questioned during a radio interview before his death, Robert Boulin declares that he's transparent on this affair. He has nothing to hide. He knows facts that he can't mention on the radio. I listened to the interview. He said that, I know things that I can't tell you here, and it will come out and you will understand what's happening.
Right.
Obviously, he died a few days later.
So clearly he did know something.
But it's for his friends, it does smell like he knew something that someone else didn't want to come out, yes. So according to people at the time, Chirac, who took control of the RPR, so later president in the 90s, after quitting as prime minister. He was prime minister in the mid-70s and he quit in 76. So at that point, he took power in the RPR party, so the right-wing party, and he used it to try to become president. So he ran in the 1981 presidential elections, which he lost.
There's Mitterrand that won that, wasn't it?
Mitterrand won it. So he says that he rages an open war against VGE. He hated VGE, apparently.
Oh, right, okay.
And when VGE announced that Robert Boulin would be his prime minister at some point, according to people in the party, that sent him into a rage, and he decided to do something about it. So some people say that Chirac was at the center of everything that happened to Robert Boulin.
Really?
Yes. Of course, there's no proof of that, because nobody would leave traces of that. You wouldn't write it down and send notes to people.
Of course not.
So now you would probably use Telegram or WhatsApp so that it doesn't leave any trace or something like that. But that's what people remember at the time.
Right.
So they think that definitively Chirac is behind it, because he hated VGE, then hated Robert Boulin for being a traitor, because the RPR is right-wing party, EDF is center, and even though you would think they would agree on a lot of things, they also disagree strongly on a few others.
Yeah.
And because Chirac had quit as prime minister, which opened the door to Robert Boulin possibly becoming prime minister.
Yeah.
Apparently he was really, really, really pissed off.
All right, okay. That's the thing with French politics. It's a very, very wide political spectrum.
Oh, compared to the US, yes.
Yeah.
The whole political spectrum in the US fits within one party here, and there's dozens.
Just about, yeah. I mean, it is not only hugely a big spectrum. There's also lots of parties. You're just there's no two-party system here at all.
No, it's not a two-party system, and it varies a lot as well. They are disbanded and recreated, and
it's very dynamic.
Yes,
very dynamic.
Yes.
So yes, you can see why there would be a lot of skullduggery going on if you're seen to piss off the wrong people.
Yeah, because it's not left against right,
no,
as the Americans would see it, but really from here it would be right against right.
Yes,
they're all on the right side. But anyway, it's not left against right.
No.
It is really all all over the place.
Oh, no, this couldn't be further from the...
Because, for
the
example,
left.
Macron, when he took power, had a party that was ranging from centre-left to right. So he was covering 2 main parties and hundreds of small centre parties as well.
Yeah, he hoovered up a lot of
Yes.
stragglers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a weird party that nobody would understand in the US or even in the UK.
No.
Because it's a party that goes from the left to the right.
Yes.
It was a strange party that still exists, but probably won't for much longer.
No, not the way it's going.
So anyway, that's where people think the whole affair came out.
So Chirac
It was probably made up by people who Chirac sent to try to soil his name so that he wouldn't become prime minister. And that didn't work, obviously, because VG just didn't give a crap. He wanted somebody competent to be prime minister, so it really didn't care. And those stories were probably wrong, probably false, and lots of people assumed that they were.
Yeah.
So he wasn't interested. He didn't care. So that didn't stop the problem that the RPR or Chirac had.
Yeah.
So obviously they decided to go for another alternative, which was to get rid of him. That's what people say.
Yeah.
In March 2022, there was an interview with Bernard Pons. You might have seen him. He was 91 at the time in 2022, and he was a minister many, many times. And that was not long before his death. And he said that it was an assassination, and the truth should be known, even if it creates trouble for the party. So he was minister at the time because he was 91 in 2022. He would have been young at the time, but he would have been around.
And he would have been senior.
He would have been MP his whole life. So he would have been around and seen things in the 60s, 70s. And yeah, in a 2022 interview, he said, it was an assassination. And even though it's going to be hard for the party, it should be known what happened.
Oh, yeah.
And then he died. But there's apparently no weird thing in his death. It's just he was 91, he was old.
Yeah. Time catches up with you in your 90s.
Yes. So when people started looking into it after the fact, quite a long time after, they started to see a few things not adding up. So we know the autopsy doesn't make any sense.
No.
Also, early emergency responders who were interviewed in the 2000s, so quite a long time after, 30 years, most of them were retired when they were interviewed, said that one of them said that when he arrived on the scene, he found the body about 9 meters from the shore, with the head about 2/3 above the water. And he said, when I saw him, I didn't think he possibly have drowned. His head was pretty much entirely over the water line.
Okay, so he wouldn't have been struggling.
No, obviously his body was heavier at one end, and he just floated in a diagonal shape, and his head was above the water.
That's
mostly.
Weird.
So he didn't think he would have drowned.
No.
At the time he just came and he was an early emergency responder. He also remembers that Robert's face was swollen, and he had bruises and hematomas all over his face. And he, at the time when he was told it was a drowning, he thought,
no.
How do you hit yourself when you're drowning? Water's not that hard.
No.
So to him it made no sense.
No, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, that makes even less sense than the blood pooling at the back.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense either. So a lot of the early responders, when they were interviewed many years later, the vast majority said they didn't think for a second that he drowned, looking at the body and where it was found and how it was found. There was also a firefighter who reported at the time that his body was folded. To him, it looked like he had been in a box.
Right.
After he was killed, and kind of became rigid that way.
Right. And
then was thrown in the water. Because he thought, when you drown, you don't suddenly turn into a ball. You're flat.
Not in water. You tend not to ball up in water.
Yes, and that's probably how the head was above the water. He wasn't floating. He was actually possibly on his knees in 60 centimeters of water.
Yeah.
So most of his body was outside the water. So to him, that made no sense. He couldn't explain it at the time, and he had reported it at the time, but nobody really listened to him. There was also a firefighter diver, because of course they sent water divers because there's a bit of water. That's the way you do things.
Yeah.
And he said that when they got the body out of the water, his shoes had no mud on them, and his own shoes were totally covered in very sticky mud. You know, the black stuff.
Yeah. So he floated over to the lake.
He hovered over the water, yes, and then drowned.
And then drowned.
That's the only way you can explain it, because his shoes were clean. So that doesn't make any sense to him. All the firefighting personnel at the time, so including those people, were told that by the hierarchy to shut up and move on. They were told, it's not your problem, you don't talk about it. And that's why nobody talked about it.
Wow.
Even the gendarmes, who were the first ones on the scene, obviously, because that's their jurisdiction.
Yes, their job.
Outside big cities, it's not the police, it's gendarmes, it's the army.
Mm-hmm.
So a colonel who was one of the first ones on the scene noted that it was kind of strange that there were footsteps going to the water and then coming back. Yeah,
that is, you should really only be one way.
You would think so.
Yeah.
So he found that very strange and reported it as well. But as soon as he does that, the gendarmerie was removed from the inquiry. So then it was investigated by the police instead.
No, right. And no doubt somebody who was the right person for the job.
Well, when he was asked about it a long time later, again in the 2000s, his answer was, well, yeah, at the time they must have thought that these idiots might find the truth. So they were removed. So the gendarmerie is not investigating the case when it should have been.
Yep.
And when he asked at the time about these footsteps, weird footsteps going to and from the water, there was a guy there in civilian clothes who told him, you ignore that, it's none of your business. They have no idea who that guy was. He didn't show any official card, he wasn't wearing any uniform, he was in civilian clothes. They have no clue who that guy was, but he was giving people orders, including the order of being quiet and not talk about what they see.
He sounds like a cleaner.
He sounds a bit like a cleaner, yeah.
He sounds like a political
cleaner. He's Victor,
cleaner. Yeah.
So nothing happens for a few years, and 4 years after the body was found, color photos of the autopsy surface.
Holy crap.
Nobody knows where they came from. But the family, when they see those photos, they discover that his face indeed had massive bruises.
They obviously didn't do an open casket at the funeral.
No, obviously not. And that matches the description of one of the first responders when he said that he had bruises and couldn't explain how you drown and somehow get bruises on your face.
And there is just nothing about this that sounds even plausible.
Yes, because
they did such a bad job.
Yes. One of the explanations people were given is, oh, well, it's just hit his face. There's no rocks on that lake or around the lake. There's just no rocks. You can't find a rock to hit your face on.
Maybe if he'd fallen from kind of like a cliff in Paca, but this is Pans.
Yeah, exactly. It's a small lake in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
There's no fall to happen. It's not possible.
No.
So the body is exhumed and a new autopsy is performed, and it reports 2 fractures on the face that, according to the doctor who made the autopsy, were done when he was still alive. And the 3 doctors who do their second autopsy say he didn't drown and he didn't commit suicide.
Wow. Is anyone surprised by that?
Not really now, no. But that's it. Nothing else happens. Because the inquiry is closed.
So it wasn't a suicide, but we're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah. Essentially, a second autopsy happens because the family made a big fuss out of it, and they sued the government as well. So they started a lawsuit against the government, and as part of that lawsuit, they did an autopsy, a second autopsy, but that's it. It died there.
I mean,
nothing happened.
I almost feel this is kind of like Crime Most Russia.
Yes.
Or Crime Most Italy.
Yes.
I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah, especially for a minister. It's not like a homeless guy who was found under a bridge. It's a minister who was likely to become prime minister. So it's not nobody. It's people who people would have known very well, would have heard of a lot. But yeah, somehow they managed to bury it. I
mean, it's just crazy. If this had happened in the States, the whole world would know about it. And this is the first time I'm hearing about it. And it's crazy.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm talking about this story is because it restarted recently.
Good.
In 2015, Robert Boulin's daughter, Fabienne Bourget, decided to press charges against the state again.
Good.
And in September 2015, the Versailles Tribunal opened a new inquiry for sequestration, kidnapping followed by death or murder, and they want to qualify what exactly were the circumstances of his death.
Yeah.
So that starts again in 2015. In November 2020, a new medical examination takes place and rules out drowning, and that was in part because of the fracture to the skull.
Yeah.
Because they said, no, you don't commit suicide by hitting your face on
No.
the rock that doesn't exist and then drown.
No.
So at that point, that's where we are at the moment. A new inquiry has been opened. There's been a new examination of the body, but nothing else has happened yet. It's taking a long time to investigate.
I just got a horrible feeling nothing will end up happening with this.
It's hard to say, because the difference between now and 1979 is the people who were in power at the time were the people who wanted him to shut up. They're all dead now. So there would be, I would think, a lot less resistance against knowing what happened, because the people who are going to be accused of murder are long gone. There's nobody left from 1979 who was a minister in 1979, or even running the parties
in
1979.
Chirac's got quite a legacy though, hasn't he?
His party no longer exists, for a start.
No, okay.
So the people running the party now are much younger. The people who were around at the time are all gone. I can't think of anybody who would have been around at the time. Because if you were a minister or even somebody important in the party in 1979,
yeah,
we're talking 40 years later now, you would be at least in your 80s, if not 90s, if not 100. So nobody's around now. So there's going to be a lot less pushback.
Yeah.
Because nobody cares now, because whoever it was is gone.
Dead.
So we might get to somewhere at some point now.
Mm.
But at the time, obviously, there was a lot of people who had a lot to lose. And somehow they managed to make everything die and disappear. And I haven't heard of that story since the 80s.
No.
Because nobody could look into it until now.
Crazy.
So we still don't know
No.
what happened. It's clearly not a suicide. Even the doctors paid by the government now say there's no way it's a suicide.
No.
That's pretty much all we know. So what people think in interviews now is he was kidnapped, he was beaten up, he was killed.
Yeah.
We don't know how.
Mm.
And then he was dumped into the lake.
Yeah, well. And for the French who are watching House of Cards, maybe it's not so far from reality.